So I'm going to be very honest about something. My views, my outlook, and my mindset on marriage has pretty much been fairly simple, mostly pretty general, fairly straightforward, but mostly optimistic. And I've been that way for the past couple of years that I've been doing this podcast up until the 24th of January 2024, where my entire outlook, my entire worldview on it completely shifted for the first time ever. And while you might think that it was something super major that happened that completely changed my worldview on it, it was actually something so simple. My entire mindset on marriage actually got shifted because of one tweet. A single tweet altered my mindset around the entire thing. Although, to be more specific, it was actually more of the possibilities and, the inner workings of the entire union. And it wasn't necessarily the tweet itself, but rather the replies and the reposts that came with it that actually shifted my worldview on the entire thing. And I'm going to get into all of that and how that kind of altered my thought process on the entire thing. But before I can do that, where are my manners? I should have started with an intro. So, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. This is a much more shortened, raw version of the episodes that I normally do, and I usually do these ones when I'm on break, or at least I release these ones when I'm on break, so that I can manage to just chill and just kind of put a bit of break time to the break time podcast so that, when I come back in for the regular episodes, I'm a little bit more refreshed and rejuvenated. Anyways, what was I talking about? Yes, my mindset on marriage kind of shifting all because of a single particular tweet, or at least the replies to this particular tweet. So it's the 24th of January. I'm just scrolling through Twitter, nothing too big, kind of just enjoying a bit of the banter that goes around and some of the more random tweets. But I stumble upon this one tweet which says, and I quote, "Married men on my timeline, how are you holding up? Do you feel like you've gotten to the end or not yet? This is a safe space as usual." End quote. Now, when I kind of saw this one, I was thinking, maybe it's just going to be a bunch of guys talking about how, it's just okay, it's nothing too big, the wife is alright. I was expecting some sort of boring answer from people, most of the guys, because, this was a tweet that was supposed to be replied to by guys. But what I found was just absolutely horrendous. Some of the replies that I actually saw was some of the worst that I've ever heard of. And the thing is, you read some of them and they just hurt. So let me give you a very simple example. One of the replies that's here says, and I quote, "In 2020, I left my wife because I had reached my breaking point. By then, we were living in South B. Long story short, she sent her brothers to look for me. They found me and took me back to her, where she did things to me that I've never thought of leaving her ever since then." End quote. So that was one of the ones that I saw. I was thinking, probably, dude might be the exception to the rule. And there's a lot of guys that probably haven't gone through this. But there's another tweet that I see right below that one as I'm busy just scrolling through. And it says, and I quote, "In 2019, I moved in with her, but she was so toxic and I thank God we separated." End quote. And I was thinking, probably these are just guys that just didn't have it so good. And, probably couldn't get any worse than this. Then I saw one tweet, and it was a quoted reply to this guy's original tweet. And to be honest, in as much as it has been since deleted, it was one of the ones that I think caught the most attention of people just because of how brutal it sounded. Because I can actually still remember it to this day, not necessarily verbatim, but in short, what the guy was saying was, for the past couple of years, he's been living with his wife in the same house, but they haven't slept in the same bed for years. So the wife sleeps in one room, he sleeps in another. He is pretty much just with her and in that house just because of the kids. And the dude has not felt anything for the wife in a while. And at the stage they're at, even though she was to die, he wouldn't feel a damn thing. And honestly, the only thing that he's hanging on to is his kids, who he loves very, very much. And I'm not entirely sure if the guy had added that he drinks quite a bit, but I'll just sort of assume that part and forget about it because it's not necessarily that conducive to the entire story. Because the issue here is, like, you go and you look through this thread and it was so bad. Well, granted, the fortunate side of it is after a couple of hours, the more happier married men actually came out of the woodworks and they started talking about how they've been married for like 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. And they love their wives, they love the marriage, it's a two-person job, blah, blah, marriage works, blah, blah. But reading through the thread itself, checking out what it is that different guys were saying, like, it absolutely twisted my view on marriage today, because however it is I may want to argue this entire thing, these are married men. They're not a part of the red pill community of dudes that are mostly single, possibly lonely, and still trying to be hoes till the age of 50 type dudes. Like, they're not those guys. These are guys that actually took the plunge and got married, and they're advising against it, considering that there were quite a number of guys who are like, oh, marriage is a scam, or, marry from your tribe, and so on and so forth. Like, these are married men. They have the experience to back up the fact that they probably are not very pro-marriage right now. And I know it's not the first time we've had situations like this. Like, you find older married women who got married super early advising younger women to not get married from time to time, and they talk about how it robbed them of their youth and stuff like that. If they had more time, if they'd have taken some more time before even considering marriage to go and chase a career and try and live life a little bit better, then they'd be happier, blah blah. But like, normally, even though you have situations like that, you can still see that this is someone who actually got kids and enjoys the fact that they got kids, and they still feel a little bit fulfilled, even though they say that the whole idea of marriage, at least at a young age for women, wasn't entirely a great thing. But for these guys who were married or are married, like, they're just not for it the entire way. It's not, like, do it at a later time, or do it at an earlier time, or do it with such and such a person. At least for some of them, like, they're just not for it. And by all means, for anyone who looked through this entire thread of replies, and even some of the quoted replies before the positive ones actually started rolling in a lot later, you'd probably not be very pro-marriage. And this was the very first time when, like, my whole thought process on it was actually challenged to the level that it actually was. Because most times I'll sort of just think about it in like a debating way, but I'll always still be pro-marriage. But this was the first time when I was like, if this is what we're going through right now, is it really a good idea to get married? Because I don't even know how it is that I can defend the institution of marriage if we have so many negative stories from guys themselves. And at some point I was thinking, maybe the guys just got people that they weren't particularly compatible with, or, they didn't really, find someone that was particularly good for them. Maybe for the women, they found something that was great, or they'd be a lot better with this and they'd enjoy it and they'd be very, very for it. But if you actually go and you check the posts where the women are talking about marriage, older women who are talking about it, they're also not very pro-marriage. They will complain about many, many different things that the husbands don't do or wish the husbands do, or certain cases of infidelity, or just, certain examples of men that they have married or are married to that aren't the best, and so on and so forth. And the thing is, like, at this point, it's almost like both sides are advocating against the idea of marriage. Even though the thought of it sounds great, even though the thought of you having a wedding and saying that you're married sounds great, the whole idea of the institution of it and being with someone on the whole happily ever after type thing, for a lot of people right now, does not seem like a particularly good idea. And it's hard to defend it. It's honestly so hard to come up and be like, you should probably still consider it because, there's the tax breaks and statistically you're happier. But at the same time, you're like, on the ground, you're talking to guys and they don't seem very happy about it. There's a lot of guys that aren't very pro-marriage, but I'd probably say that most of them aren't very pro-marriage because I look at other people's stories and most of them are just pro-red pill. Or they're super conservative and they believe that today's women, or should I say the modern women, have kind of lost their femininity or have kind of killed the reason to marry them, because now it's like they're trying to compete with us, and they don't make for great wives, and they don't give their husbands a certain kind of treatment, so it's a bad idea. And for those guys, you can kind of understand why they wouldn't be pro-marriage, and I can deal with those ones. But when a married man or a formerly married man advocates against it, or tells young men to be very careful or even be very fearful of the entire thing, I kind of get a little bit worried, because now I don't know how it is I can speak for it if the people who are in the union aren't speaking for it. But then at some point, I kind of remembered something that I saw on social media. I think it was like, maybe 2, maybe 3 years ago, where some guy was talking about how if a man is unhappy in the relationship can still continue as normally as it does. But if a woman is unhappy in the relationship, then the relationship isn't going to run as smoothly as it did. Up until you can get her to a point where she is happy, the relationship won't be as smooth as you'd actually want it to be. And when I thought about that quote, when I thought about the guy that said that back during that time, like, I was thinking about it. I was like, maybe it's a little bit of cap. Maybe it could not entirely be right. But at the same time, I could see where the sense was. Because a lot of times guys can exist in relationships and not be happy and not speak about it, because they know very well trying to talk about it just doesn't yield any sort of meaningful discussion out of it. It's just going to be the babe being super defensive and shit, and that doesn't really help anything. Because if you're going to try and have a discussion with someone and the very first thing they're going to do is start off by being defensive, then why bother arguing with them in the first place? It doesn't really make sense. And so for a bit, when I was kind of thinking about it, I was like, maybe a lot of these guys are just unhappy in the relationship, and they're not able to voice the concerns because someone's going to be defensive, and maybe that's the problem. And I was getting so ready to put that out there and be like, what, this is probably what we need to actually look at. But the more I look at the tweets, both positive and negative, the more I look at the replies that people have given, the more I look at the stories, the more I realize that honestly, this isn't the only problem that's out there. There's a myriad of other problems. And this will not be the one size fits all that I hoped that it probably could be. And on top of that, you could throw the blame one side or the other side, and everyone's going to have their side of the story, and they're going to think that they are the right ones, or maybe they might think that they messed up. And yet that may not necessarily be true, or it might be true. So in reality, this is a lot more complicated than I actually thought. So to kind of conclude all of this, if I can really try and conclude this, well, we're all kind of stuck in a bit of a quagmire, because it seems like the women aren't happy being married, or at least some of them aren't. But there's a lot of guys that actually aren't particularly happy, in as much as there are some that are happy being married. The reality of it is pretty hard out here, and honestly, neither of us has the right answers, or even answers to this entire quagmire that surrounds and is inside this union that we call marriage. The truth of it is, well, you kind of just have to hope that you find a partner that understands you, that you can gel with, and is willing to work on the relationship, on the union with you. And unfortunately, I kind of have to live with the possibility that even though I will strive to treat the person that ends up being my wife, ends up being my partner, with, the best treatment that I can give her, there's still that very, very possible potential reality that even that might not be enough for her. And sad as it is to think about, it's a reality that happens for a lot of people on a daily, regardless of gender. So I just have to pray and hope for the best, and whatever comes, just hope that I can handle it as best as I can. Although then again, considering that I am pretty clueless on this entire thing, I want your thoughts on it. Also, having both the positive and the negative stories from you guys can also help drive this conversation forward. So I'd like those ones as well. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.